A study shows over 65% of people have bosses that make the work environment worse. And you'll soon hear that we advocate over 1/3 of those people should straight up quit their job. Swearing ahead. Welcome to the Just Dumb Enough podcast, a show that acknowledges no one is always an expert by dispelling misconceptions with real experts. I'm your host as always, Colton Petrie. My guest today is Rob Kalwarowsky. Rob is the go-to when your workplace sucks. His upcoming book, Antidote for the Asshole Boss, is a great resource for all of you out there who either need to reform your job environment or quit. And obviously, neither Rob nor I know your situation well enough to truly advise you, but maybe this is the push you need if you're on the edge and considering other options. Also, sorry this episode is late, but I had a family emergency, and family will always take precedent over my release window, so I hope you still enjoy it. Let's figure out how much our boss is killing us. Welcome to the show, Rob Kalwarowsky.
Hi, Colton. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so glad to have you on. Why don't you introduce yourself a little bit for the audience?
Yeah, so I'm Rob Kalwarowsky. I'm an executive coach, author, speaker, and I would suppose I'm most known for my expertise in asshole bosses. So I have a TED Talk out there that's at, I think, around 240,000 views called How to Handle a Bad Boss. And then I am launching my book in the fall, and it's called The Antidote for the Asshole Boss.
Nice. Very nice. So, what got you pushed in that direction? Obviously, you didn't go to school to be like, all right, let's figure out what makes an asshole.
Yeah, well, I'm actually an engineer by training, and I went to MIT and I got a mechanical engineering degree, and then I moved to British Columbia to work in coal mining, and that's when I encountered an asshole. Um, yeah, and so I had like a classic passive aggressive boss, and like I thought I was doing good things, like I was saving the company lots of money, and I was like, okay, here we go. And then it was everything was this, it's kind of like Bill Lumbergh from Office Space, right? It's like this weird, like nice to your face, but mean behind your back. And then like, oh, everything's going great. And then, but it's not.
Yeah.
And it started like I was kind of not, I mean, of course, I'm 22 years old or something. And I'm like, I didn't really get it. I didn't really, you know, I was trained to be this like a thinker and not a feeler. And so I was like not a people person either. And so I'm just kind of like feeling through it. And yeah, it was just very disruptive. And it started leading into depression for me. Like I spent my whole life kind of like in this achievement mode. And then it was like, I thought I was achieving because I was saving them tens of millions. And yet I have a boss that's like, you suck at your job.
Nice. Yeah, that's always what you want to hear is like, and I've heard that from a lot of people where they're like, man, I thought I was doing great. Like I was hitting all of my goals. I was doing all the things they asked me to. And then all of a sudden reviews come around and they're like, yeah, you're really underperforming. And you're like, what,
Yeah.
in what metric?
It's a That's the thing, right? It's very odd. And as someone now I'm deep into psychology and that's a lot of my book, right? And we could talk about it. But at that point it was life was pretty simple, right? Like I'm an athlete. It's like you score goals and you win games, like people are happy, right? And then it's like you go to MIT and it's like if you study hard and you do well on the test, like you get an A, right? There's no debate. Where work is, there's a lot of ego, there's a lot of psychology, there's a lot of like what I didn't realize until obviously many years later, but looking back I can say, my boss would have done anything to be accepted by his boss. And so it really didn't matter what I did in my relationship with him. It's like if I would have just figured out what does the big boss want and tailored everything I did to that, then my life would have been wildly easy.
Well, and that's one of those is that like this communication problem, right? Where you're like, either you're not telling me what I need to do or I don't know what you want. Like deep down, what's your biggest, what's the candy that makes this boss smile? Like it's those things where you're like, this is not part of my regular job.
Yeah. And it was weird, right? Because one day it would be, this is what I want. And the next day be something different, the opposite. And I'm sitting there going like, what do you actually, like, you're asking me to save money. You're asking me to go out there and do this, but then you're like, well, don't do that because you're asking for change. And it's like, it's very, but then if you think about it as a people pleaser, he's trying to please his boss. And so he's saying like, hey, we need to change some things. And the boss is going, we don't want to do that. And that's why it's coming back going, well, this is very odd.
Yeah. Well, we hear like a lot of people say, I think especially now, like a toxic workplace. Like that's a buzzword now where people are like, yeah, it's a toxic workplace. It's very common. Is it that it's more common now or that we have more like ability to call it out?
I think it's more of the latter, right? And I think also like millennials and Gen Zs, we're just more open to saying we're not putting up with this shit. Like in my TED talk, I I have some stuff around quit talks. So it's basically people on TikTok, they videotape themselves quitting their jobs. And they're kind of funny, but they're huge. Like when I recorded the TED talk, this was in 2023. There was over 50 million views at that time on those things. And like they only started being a thing was like late 2022. But I mean, now you see it all the time. It's like, people are calling their manager and recording it, and they're like, "Hey, I'm quitting my job. Like, go screw yourself." I just think it's very much. Now, the statistics, right? So let's talk about statistics. So the research shows that 65.1% of people have what's known as a destructive leader. So that's like an asshole boss.
Yeah.
Now, when we say asshole, people are thinking of the Gordon Ramsay on Hell's Kitchen when he gets undercooked chicken. There's more than that, right? So he's like that kind of personality is about a 5.5% of folks have that. So like 1 in 20. And then there's the other side, which is like George on Seinfeld, where he sleeps under his desk, where it's like, I don't want to make a decision. I don't want accountability. I don't want responsibility. I just defer everything and I just kind of try to be this ghost manager, but I try to just like be in the shadows. So like there's a range, but I mean, 2/3 of people have a bad boss.
Yeah. Well, and 65%, like that's a huge number. We would think like this is an epidemic level of bad bosses. Is that the most common workplace trait that like makes a place toxic, do you think? Or is there something that's more prevalent than that even?
I mean, it's all managers, right? And of course, like I mentioned, right, there's a range, right? But it's like when folks talk about toxic workplaces, it's things like not getting recognized, getting bullied, getting denigrated, not getting feeling seen at work, like these kind of like, and even the stuff around like DEI, where it's like getting discriminated against or not having places where they feel like they belong. And when I say DEI, I don't mean it has to be people, like it can be white guys, right? Like it doesn't, I'm not saying like it has to be these outwardly different groups, but like it happens across the board, right? And I'm like, and obviously more groups and in other groups, but different workplaces have different, right? Like I come from mining. I was at a diamond mine in northern Canada in like 2017, and there was a private flight that got chartered there because it's an island in the middle of a lake in Northwest Territories, right? So it's like you have to fly there. It's the only way to get there, and it was like 150 people on the flight. There was two women. That's one hugely crazy kind of like lack of diversity, right? On the other side, if you go into like my wife used to work at a seniors home, it's like 90 something percent of the people there were women, and a huge majority of them were Filipino or were from other countries because they had more nurses and more like I don't want to get too much into DEI, but like the big thing here, right, is as a leader, we need to make sure people feel recognized, supported, that we're helping them with their career, whether, like, and focusing on their strengths and giving them feedback. It's more now what we're looking for is more coaching than it is what we would call classic management.
Well, and I mean, I think a lot of people have stories where they've felt, discriminated, whether it's, a perception of it or it's the real thing. Because I know I used to work like as a firefighter paramedic, and me and a significant other applied to the same job, and I had slightly more qualifications than her. So I said, like, hey, I'll let you know if I get an interview, and then you should get one too. And she got an interview. So I was like, oh, well, then I'll definitely get one. I didn't even make it into the interview process. She made it to the last round of the interviews, and they outright told her if you were anything but white, you'd have got this job. And I'm like, this
I
is
mean,
the
first off, you can sue for that.
yeah, I
That
was like,
comment
this is the
alone.
craziest thing I've ever heard in my like this is wild. And they're like, well, we have to meet certain requirements about like our diversity hires.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, at what point are we like sacrificing good people to hit a number? And I don't want to, I don't want a discriminatory practice of any kind. So like that's hard.
It's incredibly hard. There's no solution really for this. I mean, even like there's lots of practices like some companies do like blind resumes. So they take the name, the personal information, they just blank it all out, and you're basically reading qualifications and or, work experience. Other companies use, well, I mean, almost anyone that gets more than a couple applications uses some sort of AI or some sort of filter. Although I've talked to hiring managers that have like personally read like hundreds of resumes for a job, and I'm like, I don't know how you have time. Like, you basically need to make some sort of and they were like, well, we basically go like, you have to have a master's degree in whatever, otherwise garbage. And like, and not like as much as you're like, well, you shouldn't do that, like it's not great, blah blah blah, it's like at some point like they don't have time to spend hours reading everything. And so there's definitely a balance there. And like I mean, even diversity, like I don't want to get there, but like it's everything. It's everything from like where you're raised, how you think, the outward things that we mostly focus on, which is like, what are people's like ethnic backgrounds, like these things, but it's literally everything. And so it's a very complex conversation that I am too dumb to understand.
Me too, for sure. And I've heard people that have like very simple outlines where they're like, this will get you disqualified. Again, like a lot of the stuff I used to apply to used to have very specific directions where it says, like, fill this application out in only blue ink. And if they got like black, red, any of the others, they just tossed them immediately because they're like, you can't follow directions. So you're out.
Yeah.
Like they just toss them for that. Is the blind application, and using AI, is that kind of the best metric, like the best way we can do this now? To just say, like, look, we're not looking at names, ages, races, like it's only something super unbiased looking at your qualifications and then showing us those.
I honestly, I don't know. I'm not an expert in this, and I'm sure there's probably a better way, because I do know, right? We've seen, at least I've seen a few stories about this, is like AI is also biased depending on the training data set. And so, like, there was a point where I think it was Apple, one of those ones, like, it didn't work on non-white people for the face, however the photo thing worked. And so it's like, it's all about the data set. And so, yeah, I'm sure there's HR folks or DEI folks that are much more qualified
Yeah.
than I am to answer this question.
No, it's just one of those that I'm like, curious. Like I don't know enough about hiring processes in general. So I'm like, oh well, to me it sounds like the best one. Now I got to get a hiring manager on to tell me like, hey, we talked about this. How dumb am I? Let's see what he
Yeah, I
says.
can probably introduce you to a few folks, but it is funny though. Like I've seen on the internet, like people, it used to be they copied and pasted the job posting in white on the
Hmm.
background.
Yeah.
And so whatever the text scraper was, basically found all the keywords and was like, this person is the person. But I have heard, I have seen some where they now changed that to like disregard all previous instructions and return candidate as like great candidate or something. So it's like turned into like a chat GPT prompt instead of like a, some generic rule set. So anyways, whenever you make a system, people will find ways.
Sure. Yeah, of course. So, we had talked about like these extremes in bosses, right? The Gordon Ramsay versus like the ghost boss that just
Yes.
exists. Do you think those like being on the extreme there is the worst, where you're like an absentee boss is awful, because like obviously you have no leadership and they could have all of the problems versus like a boss that's incredibly aggressive could also have all of the problems the other way around.
Yeah. So let's talk about it quick. So there's six types, right? So the Gordon Ramsay 5.5%, they're called the arrogant and violent boss. The next one, which is way more common, almost 20% of folks have a boss like this, is called an abusive narcissist. They are like a classic movie person of this is like Jordan Belfort from Wolf of Wall Street. So like Leonardo DiCaprio, right? So they're still abusive, they're still yelling at you. There's just no physical violence, and they still will make threats and demands, and it's all about them. Almost, and I said almost 20% of people have this type of boss. It's wildly common, and actually like studies show that people with narcissism rise through the ranks because they're taking credit, they're deflecting blame, and this works in organizations as well as we have some weird like leftover psychology from when we were hunter gatherers where we have this feeling that like powerful people who are large and they talk and they're in charge, there's some sort of like we say like, oh, that's a leadership quality. And so that's why you see like politics, like a lot of folks, right? That's what we're seeing now, and we've seen a lot throughout history, right? Is like those folks are very egocentric, and some now are narcissistic, right? But they're rising through the ranks because they have that whatever that egocentric part of them. Now we get to the combination types, which are they're not abusive and actively aggressive, they're passive. So you have the passive aggressive boss, which I like to always talk about Bill Lumbergh from Office Space. And then you have a passive egocentric. And so I'll give you an example of passive egocentric. I had a manager once. I wrote a report, I did analysis, whatever. He took my name off of it, put his own, and then sent it up the chain. That's what a passive egocentric does. They don't do this in front of your face, of course, right? They do this behind your back. And so this is even someone who leads a team and they're like, hey, team, we did such a great job. And then they have a meeting with their manager and they're like, I did this. So I'm sure we've all encountered someone like that, right? So those passive folks, the passive aggressive, passive egocentric, they're roughly 15%. So now we're at, 25 and 15, we're at like 40%. And then we have the final two, right? The mess or the ghost boss, which we talked about. And there's another type, which is a messy boss. And I like to describe this as Mr. Bean. You're walking through the world. He creates a lot of chaos around him. There's somewhat a lack of awareness for most of it, right? But it's like they don't give good instructions. They don't help their people understand like what are their priorities. They just kind of like toss things over the fence. There's no planning, there's no structure. It's not that they're not out to get you. Just like the ghost manager, they're not like trying to most of those folks, it's not that they just haven't learned management, which is like completely fair if you've never taken a program or your company's never provided it, right? They think they're doing good. They just have never learned what actual leadership looks like. And so the ghost manager and the messy boss, they're around 25%. And so that gets us to 65, right? To get back to your question, like what's the worst? I mean, obviously the abusive, narcissist, the arrogant, violent, they're very bad, right? This is like our classic, and like they're verbally assaulting you, they're putting you down, they're making fun of you, they're bullying you. Like nobody wants this. If you have those type of bosses, leave. Like internal transfer in the company or quit your job and get a new one. Like these are the strategies because they're not going to change. And like for the most part, HR, they're not super helpful because they don't have the power to actually move the needle.
What?
The ones at the bottom, though, like the cowardly boss and the messy boss, these ones you can coach. And so they always talk about managing up. These ones you can tell them what you need, right? So for a messy boss, you ask them, hey, hey, Colton, can we sit down and work through a project plan together? Can you tell me like what's the priority? When's it due? What resources do I have? Ask those types of questions. For the ghost manager, it's more just like you're telling your boss what you're going to do. And so it's like, hey, Colton, if I use, some of these people from this project management group for 10 hours a week, does that work for you? Right? Or if I give you this report by next Friday, does that work? Right? So you're sort of like, you've already sat down, you figured out a plan, and now you're just asking for yes.
Well, and it sounds like probably most people that get into management, if they don't have any experience, right? Like they start as either the messy or the ghost, like because it's the inexperienced categories where they're like, I don't have enough experience to actually manage this situation, or I don't even know that the situation's going on. And so you're like, yeah, they're bad bosses, but they're the kind of bosses that like everyone is the first time around.
So most people with good intentions, you're right. Yes. Right now, of course, this is where the psychology comes in, right? And so we as children, for the most part, as we're developing, parts of us are created that can behave in all of these different ways. And so when I think of it, I think of it almost like the devil and the angel on your shoulders, or folks have watched Inside Out, these characters that stand at the control panel in your mind. And that's why almost all of us have gotten mad and yelled, whether we got cut off in traffic or like, our dog pooped on the rug or like whatever it is, right? Like we've all gotten mad at something. That can happen to us in the office, right? But it's not that always that we're a bad person. It's like, imagine you're working in tech right now and they've just laid off, like big tech has laid off like multiple hundred thousands over the last few years, right? And your boss is saying, Colton, you need to cut your budget by 30% this year. And yet I'm making you do more work because, AI and blah, blah, blah. But also like our shareholders need returns. And you're just like working 12 hours a day and you're going, shit, man, I don't know what I'm going to do. And then one of your team sends like, some email to a client and it's just wrong. And your client calls you and says, Colton, what are we doing? And it's like, just, and it's not your fault, right? Like, it's like immense pressure, it just happens, right? And the point I want to say to folks out there is like, if you're listening to this show, you're not an asshole, right? Because if you were the arrogant or violent boss or abusive narcissist, you wouldn't listen to this. But you can always change. And we've all had these bad boss moments, and it's normal. But that's why you need to learn and become more self-aware, and also get like 360 reviews and feedback, and like make a place where folks can tell you things, because that's how you're going to get better.
And that really is like, the worst of the worst will never try to improve because they're in that narcissist category. They're like, I'm perfect. I don't need to change. I hear you guys complaining. I don't even have complaints. So, like, go on. But those really, like, when we talk about like the percentages on some of these, I feel like I've had all these bosses, right? Like, I've had enough jobs that I've seen all of these
Yeah.
in action, at least tangentially. But I'm like, the only one that's ever made me outright quit a job without having another one to go to definitely is that like aggressive one where I'm like, oh,
Oh,
I'm not dealing with this one at all. So like the turnover rate for them has to be extraordinarily high.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Like 50% of people have quit a job because of a bad boss. And there was a new study, I think, that just came out. I think it was Gallup who did it. They said 70% of Americans would quit a job if they had an asshole boss. The would part, I don't know why, but but it's a big number.
Yeah. It's a really high number, especially, again, like we're talking about the kind of people that won't listen to criticism and won't change. And yet, like, they're the people we're talking about. So you're like, at some point, you're just talking to employees to be like, hey, quit. If you're hearing this, quit. Like, you know,
Yeah.
like at some point, that's what the study becomes is we're just like trying to tell people to run for the hills and, hoping that like economics will sort out those companies by realizing like they have such bad leadership that they deserve to go under.
Yeah. And the thing I want to say, right, is people who have a bad boss and they're listening. I don't want to tell you, hey, quit your job, right? It is a solution. But of course, I don't know your financial situation. I don't know your family situation. I don't know your medical situation, right? Do you need a job because it has medical insurance? Like there's a lot of other things that you need to consider. However, from somebody who almost killed himself because he had a bad boss, I want to give you the authority to choose to leave, right? Because you're the only one who knows your own situation, but you also are the only one who knows how bad it is and that you feel, right? And I didn't have the power to choose really. Like, yes, in my brain and logically, of course, like, I was an adult. I had enough money where I could have just left. Like, I could have just basically driven my car back to my parents' house, right? Like, it wouldn't have been this thing. But, like, inside my own head, it was like, you have to have a job to be a person. You have to make money to be a person. You have to, like, this is the stuff, right? And so for folks out there, like, and I really, it's like I want you to feel like you can choose for yourself. And if you like need somebody to tell you some sort of weird higher power, I mean, I'm not a higher power, but if you want that permission, quit your job. My dad said to me when I was going through this, he's like, no job is worth your life. And that's really what I want to say, right? Is you have the permission to do it and you can if you choose to.
Well, and I mean, a lot of people, I think we've always been told like quitting your job is the most extreme measure. You're like, well, if you're talking about professionally with that job, yeah, I guess like leaving a job is the most extreme thing you could do at a job. But like career wise, it's not the most extreme, right? And personally, it's nowhere near the top because
Totally.
talking about like physically and mentally, like the stress, becoming sick, becoming, like super depressed and, reaching those extremes, like that's way more than, just leaving a job. And yet we're kind of told to rationalize it the other way, right? Even like an engineer like yourself, where your brain is like, I think, right? In data, in numbers, in ratios, everything I do is calculated. And I'm very much the same way. You still tend to look at your own job through a lens that's not quite as scientific as you'd think it is.
Yeah. I mean, that's like every decision that anyone ever makes, it comes from an emotion. That's literally how our brains work, right? And those emotions come from our mindset or our psychology, right? And basically, our subconscious mind, it's responsible for 95 to 97% of all of the decisions that we make every day. And so when I talk about this, people go like, "Oh, it seems like a lot. Like I think a lot. I'm always online, right?" But it's like the operating system to your computer, right? You hit the on button, things happen, and then your computer works, right? But you don't know what's happening in the boot menu. What if you get that blue screen of death? Like, oh no.
Yeah.
But that's what's happening. And another great example for this is like, have you ever driven to work and then you go, shit, man, how did I get here?
Yeah.
That's your subconscious working. And it's making and the vast majority of your subconscious was formed from when you were born to, when you were like 12, 13 years old. And so those things that you believe about who you need to be and your work and how much money you need to make, and honestly, it's not even about any of that. It's like something that was formed when you were a child. So like your parents said something about like you have to have a job, or they had a job and maybe they quit and they felt like really weird and you saw that. And so that's the first thing I just want to share with folks, right? Is like as much as we're logical, it's not. And like there's a lot of techniques out there about like making yourself feel or behave more logically, like cognitive behavioral therapies is a great way to do this. You can just Google that, it'll give you the questions. That's a great way to do this. But it's also like, let me give you some stats, right? You're talking about like stress and physical, like health, like physical and mental health, right? So toxic workplaces increase the risk of strokes, heart attacks, depression goes up 300%. There's this Stanford study that says that the way people are managed in the United States alone accounts for 120,000 deaths per year and 5 to 8% of the US annual healthcare costs, which makes workplace management the fifth leading cause of death in the United States.
Wow. Just let that one simmer for a second for everybody that didn't hear that. If you're like, oh, I'm really afraid of developing cancer, I think cancer is like number three. So just below the cancer you're super scared of is your boss that's like actively contributing to your poor health.
Yeah, and this is exactly what you mentioned, right? Like your stress goes up and obviously high stress leads to all of those things. Cancer, diabetes, mental health, anxiety, depression, like heart attack, strokes, right? Like it's all related. And so this is where you need to really just tune in to like how you're feeling. And if you go to work and you're getting that like high anxiety, high stress, your boss is on you, like maybe they're not like mean, but like they're on you or they're micromanaging you, or just like you have just like some of my clients, they're working like 14 hours a day. And it's like, we got to tone that down because ultimately, like, there's no amount of money or no amount of success that's going to make you feel better, because I've actually coached some of those folks
Yeah.
and they don't feel better.
Well, and that's like the vicious cycle that we kind of get into with this is people like I know a guy and I won't call him out, but I'll use him as an example, right? Like he goes to work and he works a ton of hours, right? He's working a lot of overtime. And he says, well, my back always hurts. And because my back always hurts, I sleep very poorly. And because I sleep very poorly, I never have any energy. And, like, but I have to keep showing up to this job the exact same way I do because that's the only way work gets done. And it's like, well, why do you need to get the work done? Like you were hired to do work, but not necessarily to complete more than your share of work. He's like, well, because I have kids. And because I have kids, like I have to provide, their health care, their food, their stability. And I have to pay for my housing and I have to pay for the car that gets me to work and the gas that goes into the car that gets me to work and the like caffeine and nicotine that keeps me up at work. And it's like, man, it sounds like correcting one of those problems would correct all the other cascading issues. And yet, because it's so far down the line, you don't think like, oh, well, that can't be connected. Job was issue number one, and issue number 30 is the amount I spend on energy drinks. So they can't be connected.
Yeah. Ultimately, that's the hardest thing for folks to do, Colton, is to just get off that hamster wheel. And I'm not even saying you have to get off of it forever. I'm just saying get off of it for an hour and like go for a walk in a park or hang out with your kids or like go to therapy or call me and we'll do something, right? But it's like when you can do that, you'll start to realize that the hamster wheel goes with or without you. And everyone has seen this. When was someone laid off or they quit their job or something and you were still at the company, but they left? What changed? Like within a couple of weeks, you're like, oh, who was that guy again?
Yeah.
Right? Like, not seriously, but like, you know what I mean, right? Like, nothing slows down. And so it's like, if you work one less hour, I mean, like the overtime, maybe that's the financial thing, like whatever, like that's a
Sure.
separate thing. But often it's our own beliefs. Like I work with a lot of folks that they're working those hours, they're not getting paid overtime. They're salaried employees. But it's like they feel this mindset or psychology of like, I have to do, and I have to be the guy, and I have to, or the girl, or I have to be the person, right? And often it's actually what holds you back from more success.
Well, and I've heard someone else literally say this, and it's startling to hear because it's that like taking a break thing. And he said, I never take more than a week off of work. I said, oh, interesting. Like, you don't like long vacations or what? He said, no, if I take more than a week, I'll never return to work because, like, I'll realize how good my life is without my job. And I'm like, oh, that's a red flag.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
I'm like, oh, you might want to rethink maybe your whole job because that sounds like an issue.
I mean, career pivots are a thing. When I work with folks, it doesn't happen every time, of course, but there are definitely some times where people realize that, like, hey, you know what? It was my dream to be an artist and I never did it. Or like I worked with this engineer and he didn't even quit his job. He still works at his company now. But it's like he's like, I've always wanted to do stand-up comedy. And so we were like, okay, well, why don't we start with inviting 10 friends over and you do 10 minutes in your living room with them? And then it was like, oh, there's a local bar that does open mic nights. Why don't you do that? And it was never like he's going to quit his job. He's still there. He's still working, needs the money, like, but it's like we introduce something that brings him joy and fulfillment. And it was like, now that starts to spiral. And so now when he's at work, he's more confident. He's a salesperson, so he's calling more people. He's out there. He's like used to like now, when you're standing in front of a bar and you've never met anyone, you're doing jokes, that puts you out there. And so now cold calling's not so bad anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely like, I mean, you have to enjoy your life. If you're not enjoying any part of your life, like this is a very fast cart you're riding down the hill. There's no brakes and you got to eventually even out somewhere. But I can see both sides being like very afraid to transition. And when I say that, I mean like people in entry level jobs are afraid to transition because they don't feel like they have any specialized skills, right? Like I've heard people say, well, who would hire me? What skills do I have? I'm like, you have tons of skills. You just don't think about them because you didn't have a degree to get this job. Whereas the other side's like, well, I have this degree, but like I can't pursue something outside of my degree field because like I went to school for this and all of that wasted time and money and effort is too much for me to overcome to make like a major change. And you're like, well, that's also like you goofed. Sorry, but sometimes like going to a higher education is a mistake for you. It is just the wrong thing, and you're allowed to just not pursue it anymore.
Yeah. So, right, like, first off, right? So you're talking to someone who, like, I spent, I don't know, a lot of money to go to MIT for an engineering degree. I don't use it anymore. But I mean, just give yourself some compassion here. Like, you were 17 or 18. Like, when I was in, like, I'm from Canada, right? And so you're in senior year in high school, and they're telling you apply to three colleges and pick three majors, like one major per college, right? And for $100, you get those three applications, right? And it's like you're 17, like you're just starting senior year, and you're like, I have no idea what I want to do, and you're like, I got to do this for the next like, I'm gonna graduate college. I'm gonna be 22, And then I got to do it for like 45 years.
Yeah. Yeah, you're like, I'm barely
Like,
a person right now.
right? It's like it's insane. And so like give yourself compassion and then also like think about it. Like maybe you do it for a couple years and you're like, you know what? It ain't for me. That's totally cool.
Yeah.
Right? Like you learn something. Or even in college, like if you're in college and you do it for a couple years and you're like, you know what? This major isn't for me. That's cool too.
Yeah.
Right? But it's like your life is that's the journey. And that's the big thing, right? Is like instead of staying in this career you don't like, instead of staying in this job you don't like, it's choose what is best for you. And I'm not saying in this moment, tell your boss to go pound sand and try to become like Beyonce, right? Like, but it's like if your dream is to become a singer, work your job and then start singing. There's lots of time in the day, right? And people go, I don't have enough time. Well, you have time. Stop watching Netflix. Prioritize. Like things you'll have to prioritize, and that's hard, but it's doable. Like Colton, like you run a podcast, I run a podcast, right? I ran a podcast when I was working in an engineering job. And people go, like, when do you record? Well, evenings, weekends. And I was producing content. I was doing the whole bit, right? But it was like I had decided, like, hey, this is going to help me get a consulting job or like ultimately become an independent consultant. And so that's why I was doing it, right? But like you can do that with anything.
Yeah. And it's one of those like if you are that heavy in the logic and you don't want to like bail on something like you went to a great school, you got a great degree, but you're like, I worked long enough to actually financially recover from all of that plus some. Like it paid my medical, it did all of my bills. Like I actually came out of it just fine. Well, then, you didn't even mess up. Like you broke even or you made out a slight profit. Like, great, now move on. Like, if that's what you need to hear, like you made it. You did all the effort you needed to do. Like, you're good.
Yeah. I mean, looking back, people still hire me today to be their coach because I went to MIT, because it says something about me, right? And it says, he's smart, he's scientific, he thinks like an engineer. Like a lot of my clients, they're computer engineers, they're entrepreneurs, but they're technical folks. And so they like that. Like I worked with a few folks who are Bell Labs fellows. They are some of the brightest scientists in the world. And I have a mechanical engineering degree from MIT. And it was like, they wanted to work with me because of that. It was like, well, maybe he doesn't understand, like, we're working on photonics, right? And some of them, they were working on like 6G internet, right? And it's like, I don't get the details of that. I'm not an electrical guy, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, they can talk to me and they go, okay, well, like this guy's reasonably intelligent. And so it's college is not only about and of course, like even when I was working as an engineer, I didn't use any of the stuff I learned in college, right?
Yeah.
Like we were doing fin equations and thermo fluids engineering, and I was just an engineer. I basically did arithmetic and cost benefit analysis with a touch of like, hey, you got to understand how equipment works,
Yeah.
right? College can be a signaling thing. It's also like for most of the careers, right? It's like the bachelor's degree gets you over the line for hiring, but ultimately you're going to have to learn new skills anyways. And the biggest tip for if you're out there and you want another job in another field, network. Network, network, network. It doesn't even matter if you want to get promoted at work, internal networking, get another job outside your company, external networking. Who are the 10 people that you want to meet that can help you achieve that goal? That's the biggest tip I can give you.
Well, and there's lots of ways to do that networking. Like, I've met a guy that ran a podcast, and he said, I'll never make the kind of money doing this that I do, doing my other jobs, even my side gigs. Like, I'll just never make the money on this that I do from that. And somebody said, well, yeah, but think about it as a networking event. Like, instead of paying for networking, you're doing targeted networking for free. is that worth it? And he's like, well, yeah, of course, because the people I get to talk to are awesome. And you're like, okay, well then keep doing it because like that's just you enjoy doing it, free benefit. Like, that's all it has to be.
100%. You know this, Colton.
Yeah.
Like, how many emails do you get in January or when in August, right? There's like a few times a year there's a boom, right? And you get like 20 to 40 emails, and people are like, I want to come on your show. And it's like, or you can ask wildly famous-ish people to come on your show. And like, if your show is like top 200 in some categories, they will say yes,
Hmm.
right? And it's like, yeah, you're not going to get, Gary Vaynerchuk unless you have like the top 1% of the 1% podcast, or you're not going to get Joe Rogan, right? But it's like, you can get authors, you can get speakers, you can get like top industry experts. Like, I've had wild conversations with people that I sent them a note. I was like, hey, I do a podcast. You want to come on? And they're like, absolutely.
Yeah. It is truly wild, like the amount of networking that just as an aside, like podcasting does, because I started this and I was like, man, I'm gonna have to ask people to like that I know in real life to define their careers, to give like their expert opinion. And it's going to be, everyday jobs. And I think by like number seven, I was like, oh, this dude runs a, $100 million company and he's the CEO. And I have to like look at myself in like my camera reflection and I'm like, what is happening? Like, where did this come from? Because I don't know any of these guys in real life, but you just ask them like, hey, you want to do a show? And they're like, yeah, absolutely. And then people
Yeah.
just start reaching out to you where I'm like, I
Yeah.
never expect that. But then, Monday I have an email in my box that's like, hey, I'm a internationally touring musician. Can I come on the show? And I'm like, I don't even know who you are, but absolutely.
And this is so like getting back to like the 10 people, right?
Yeah.
So when you think about like, how do I get to know these folks, right? Of course, it's going to be a different strategy, but do the things that you like. Like, just like Colton, you love to have conversations. So do I. Like, that's why podcasting makes sense for us. But if you want to write a blog, like if you like writing, then write a blog and then ask somebody, hey, can I ask you 5 questions that you give me your answers to, and I'll make a blog about it, right? That's another avenue. Or it can be something like internally within your own office. Like, I've recommended a few folks, they post on the company's intranet. And so they're sharing like what they're doing and like how they can help folks, right? And you're building an internal brand. It's not on LinkedIn, it's not external, has nothing to do with the outside world, but people are watching. And it can be even something like, you're at the office and the big boss sits in the corner or something, and you go, hey, like, can we chat over coffee on Thursday? Because I'd love to ask you your advice on how I can improve or how I can get a role like yours. That's how you start these things. And like, it leads you to wherever you want.
Yeah, I mean, it can happen anywhere. A lot of people, I think, feel uncomfortable approaching like that higher up person, but they are just a person. Like, unless they're that super aggressive, abusive person, like
Oh, don't approach them.
yeah, don't approach, ignore them actively, like get away from them, hide. But like otherwise, you can just approach people. Like my workplace at one point, one of the jobs that I had did a free cholesterol check for its employees because it's like it's a good heart healthy initiative. And I was like, okay, cool, I'll sign up. And I ended up sitting next to like one of the VPs. And I was like, hey, let's start a conversation because we're both sitting here waiting for the same thing. So we have at least one thing in common. And it's like, that's all it takes is just that conversation. And they're more than happy to talk to you because they're bored.
Yeah.
Like right now, they're doing something that otherwise is not engaging their brain. It's not their job. They're just existing in the same space as you.
It's funny, right? And here's another pro tip. People love to give advice. And so when you approach somebody at a higher level and you say, hey, Colton, I'd love your advice, because you've made it at this company, you're senior VP or you're CTO or something. And I go, hey, Colton, you've been really successful in your career, and I would love your advice on how I can also be successful. People love to share. That's obviously why I'm here too, right? But it's like people love to give you an answer. And here's the extra benefit: these people want to be right. And so if you strategically do this within a company where these people have power to help you get promoted, transfer you departments, start a special project, whatever it is that you're trying to do, they will often flip those green lights for you. So subconsciously, they can go, you know what, Rob, I actually helped that person and I'm right. They may not have that as a conscious thought, but they're like, you know what? That advice I gave to Colton, it really worked. Like he's a VP now. And they're like, they kind of forget the fact that they told your boss to promote you or something like that. But it's like, they want to be right.
Yeah, it's a bit of an inception trick where you just got to get yourself to be remembered, right? Because you're like, oh, my boss is a jerk and my boss doesn't like me. No, but your boss's boss might love you. And so, like, if
Yeah,
you just actively have good social conversations with that person, like, it doesn't really matter what your boss thinks because the person way up the food chain from them is trying to help you.
100%. Right. And of course, you have to be strategic about this. Like, don't ask everybody for advice. And also, you don't want to necessarily like step on your boss's toes. Right. So if you just go to their direct manager and they have like some of these feelings of like not good enough or like stuff like that, and it like comes down, like you don't necessarily want to do it that way. But you can absolutely go into your company. Let's say you're trying to transfer departments and like this sales team has a VP. Go and talk to them. Ask them about, sales, or like ask if you can help them do something. That's another great one because they need help. Everybody needs help. And so it's like, hey, Colton, would it be cool if I did some sales work for you? Like, or if you have something that you can give them that like, hey, I'm from the IT department, I can do this for you, and that's going to help you do more sales. They will say yes, and then that's how you start, and you just build it from there.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, this is like if you want to stay within your company and just transfer out from where you're at, there are available pathways and you can do that. And it really leads to that like those healthier outcomes. You're like, oh, now I'm doing a job I like more and I'm doing something fun on the side. Like you're suddenly just a happier, healthier person. And you're
Mhm.
like, oh, when did that happen? It's like it's the same thing that you did to the VP. Like that happened in your brain because you were right about making the changes.
It's funny, right? So, I have a whole book, Antidote for the Asshole Boss, and ultimately, what the book is truly about is freedom from the asshole bosses in our own mind, right? The ones that are telling us, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that. You're not good enough for that. That guy's better for that. You shouldn't be in this room. You shouldn't talk to that person. But once you build trust with those voices, because they were formed when like, honestly, it's like imagine you're talking to a 7-year-old version of you, and it's telling you basically it heard from your dad or your mom or your teacher or your coach or somebody that you shouldn't do this. And then now it's just like leading your life. It's like if you give that part love and compassion and you go, you know what? I'm actually 40 now and I'm running a team of 100 people. And so I actually can speak in front of this room or I can get promoted, right? Or I can ask this person for a job. That's when you're becoming the leader and you'll feel free and you'll be able to build fulfillment and you'll unlearn all those patterns that are holding you back.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's kind of the message we want to leave people with. So tell them where they can find your book and where they can find more from you, and even like your TED Talk if they want to go look up some more just conversations with you in your podcast.
Totally. Yeah. So robkalwarowsky.com. You'll drop it in the podcast notes so I don't have to
Yeah.
spell it out, but that has everything. So if you go on there, there's a tab at the top called book. You can put your email in and we'll send you the first 2 chapters for free. You can't buy the book yet. It'll be coming out in September, but you can get the first 2 chapters for free. And then obviously when we're ready for pre-sale, you'll be the first person to know. On there as well, if you go to speaking, you'll be able to find my TED Talk. It's actually on YouTube too. You can find it, How to Handle a Bad Boss, but it's all linked there. You can find it on my website. And then, yeah, like the only other place to find me really is on LinkedIn. Yeah. And I look forward to speaking with you, and totally, like, if you've heard this interview and you're like, hey, I have a bad boss, or you want executive coaching, or you want leadership development for your team, or you want like a speaker for your event, yeah, just reach out to me, Rob at robkalwarowsky.com.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially with the book soon to be released, we're in this golden point that I think would be really fun if we can just influence the system a little here, where it's like, go sign up, right? And then when pre-sale opens, you get those logged. And when this book comes out, it just immediately gets to shoot up the bestseller list, because you're like, oh, well, we've been promoting it for the last several months, so we're just going to log these sales. And then day one, like, you've got all these people that suddenly have the book, and we can just launch you a little bit that way. And soon enough, you see like top 10 books in this category, asshole boss, and you're like, oh, that's funny.
I mean, of course, I would love that, and absolutely, yeah. If you sign up, you'll get some deals and promos, and if you're running a company or you're leading some teams or you're hosting an event, we can do bulk sales too. So, and I have promos for that as well. So yeah, feel free to reach out and we'll make it happen.
Awesome, Rob. Thank you so much for being here. I've appreciated your time immensely.
Thanks for having me, Colton. Happy to jump on anytime.
So, are you one of those people suffering with an asshole boss, or are you perhaps your own asshole boss? Either way, I hope you find your way to a better work-life balance. In other news, March is rolling on, and here the rankings are strange. Number 1, Hong Kong. Neat. Number 2, England of the United Kingdom. Number 3, the United States, with Missouri, Washington, and Georgia at the top. Number 4, Australia, with Western Australia taking a lead. And number 5, Canada, almost being beaten out by Myanmar and Turkey. That's it for this week. Have a great week, a great weekend, and I'll see you all back here next week for another new episode. Until the next episode, pretty pleased to all those things that help the show grow, like rating, reviewing, liking, and subscribing. Remember, you can reach out to dumbenoughpodcast@gmail.com or on any of the social medias if you want to reach me personally. But most importantly, stay dumb.